Now let's head back to the White House and visit our 23rd president, Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was born August 20th, 1833, in North Bend, Ohio, and passed away March 13th, 1901, in Indianapolis, Indiana. Was the 23rd President of the United States from 1889 to 1993. A moderate Republican who won an election majority while losing the popular vote by more than 100,000 to Democrat Grover Cleveland. Harrison signed into law the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the first legislation to prohibit business combinations and restraint of trade. Harrison was the son of John Scott Harrison, a farmer, and Elizabeth Irwin Harrison, and grandson of the 9th President, William Henry Harrison. In 1852, he graduated with distinction from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and the following year he married Caroline Lavinia Scott, with whom he had 2 children. In 1854, after 2 years studying law, Harrison moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, to establish his own practice. Ignoring his father's contention that none but knaves should ever enter the political arena, Harrison found in Indianapolis an inviting arena for his political ambitions, especially in the newly formed Republican Party. He served in the Civil War as an officer in the Union Army, finally reaching the rank of brevet brigadier general. Resuming his law practice after the war, Harrison supported the Reconstruction policies of the Radical Republicans. He failed to win the governorship of Indiana in 1876, but in 1881 he was elected to the United States Senate. As a senator, Harrison defended the interest of the homesteaders and Native Americans against the railroads, supported generous petitions for former soldiers, and fought for civil service reform and modernly protect tariff. Harrison was a kind man of stout principle who possessed a keen intellect and phenomenal memory. He could captivate an audience with stirring ordinary and unhinge his opponents with cold, discerned eye. On many occasions, he widely sacrificed valuable political support rather than abandon his convictions. As in 1882, he opposed the Chinese Exclusion Act on the ground that it would abrogate rights guaranteed to the Chinese by the Bellegarde Treaty of 1868. A deeply religious man, he was an elder in the Presbyterian Church for 40 years. Harrison was known before, during, and after his years of public service as a man of moral courage. Nominated for the presidency by the Republicans in 1888, he lost the popular vote by $439,853 to Cleveland's 5,540,309, but won the election by polling Cleveland in the Electoral College by 233 electoral votes to Cleveland's 168. Harrison's victory in the Electoral College owed much to lavish spending by his campaign in the critical swing states of New York and Indiana. Harrison's administration was marked by an innovative foreign policy and expanding American influence abroad. His Secretary of State, James G. Blaine, presided over the First Continental Conference of American States held in Washington, D.C., which established the International Union of American Republic, later called Pan-American Union, for exchange of culture and scientific information. In addition, Blaine successfully resisted pressure from Germany and Great Britain to abandon American interest in the Treaty protective over Samoan Island. He negotiated a treaty with Great Britain to refer to arbitrate a long-standing controversy over the hunting of seals in the Bering Sea. The administration also concluded treaties of commercial reciprocity with numbers of foreign governments. In February of 1893, after an American-led coup toppled Queen Lakaloni in the Hawaiian Islands, Harrison placed the Treaty of Annex before the Senate, but Democrats blocked the ratification for the remainder of Harrison's term. In 1890, Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, but an economic depression of the agrarian West and South led to pressure the legislation that conservative Republicans normally resisted. The result was an accommodation in which conservatives gained the McKinley Tariff Act, which subsequently raised duties on most imports, but yielded to irrigations and reformers and measures such as the Sherman Antitrust Act, which outlawed every contract, combination, or conspiracy in resist or trade of or commerce. The Sherman Silver Purchase Act of the same year, which was 1890, actually the McKinley Tariff Act, and the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Sherman Silver Purchase Act all were of 1890, which required the government to buy 4.5 million ounces of the metal every month. Farmers and debtors in the free silver movement had long advocated a bimetal of like gold and silver standard for nation's currency in the belief that an increase in the amount of money in circulation would rise crops price and allow for easier debt repayment. Although the Treasury had a surplus of at the inception of Harrison's administration, the billion-dollar Congress spent such enormous sums on soldiers' pension and business subsidies that the surplus soon vanished. Many Americans, particularly farmers, viewed the Republican-controlled White House and Congress as wasteful and too closely aligned with the nation's wealthy elite. In the congressional election of 1890, the Democratic recapture of the House of Representatives by a large majority, and during the remaining 2 years of his term, Harrison had little, if any, influence on legislation. He was renominated at the party convention in Minneapolis in 1892, but growing populist discontent and several major strikes late in his term, especially the violent steel strike at Homestead, Pennsylvania, in July of 1892, largely accounted for his defeat by his own rival Grover Cleveland by an electoral vote of 145 to 277. Neither candidate campaigned much, owing in part to Mrs. Harrison's declining health and her death midway through campaign. Having retired to his law practice in Indianapolis, Harrison, at 62, married his deceased wife's niece and caretaker, Mary Lloyd Dimmock. They had one daughter. He emerged briefly to serve as leading counsel for Venezuela in the arbitration of his boundary dispute in Great Britain. Harrison was also much demand as a public speaker, and a series of lectures delivered at Stanford University was published in 1901 as Views of an Ex-President. He died of pneumonia that year in his house in Indianapolis. He was the last Civil War general to serve as president. And with that, I will see you all in the next one.